Hello and welcome to this video where I will be explaining what a TMB loot system is in World of Warcraft. So TMB stands for That's My BiS, and BiS is an abbreviation for Best in Slot, where slot refers to the character equipment slot. So if you click C when playing World of Warcraft, it opens the window and you can see all the different slots on your character. So BiS is the item that is best in that equipment slot in the game. So achieving a full BiS set, which means every single equipment slot on your character is the best item for your class, is considered a major accomplishment in-game. So that's where the name That's My BiS comes from. TMB, or That's My BiS loot system, is something that's invented by players outside of the game. It's not a default part of World of Warcraft, and it uses a predetermined loot priority sheet, also called a wish list, that is made outside of the game to distribute loot in the game. But the actual loot system in the game that's used is the master looter. So the master looter will follow the rules of the That's My BiS and award loot accordingly to the winners. So there's a TMB is a tool for loot management, which significantly helps this process. So it allows everyone to easily keep track of the raid's loot distribution and sign up for their wish list. So there's a website for that. It's called that'smybis.com. So this is on that'smybis.com website, and here the creator of the website is explaining like where did that name come from, That's My BiS. So his answer is, his or her, it's an ongoing meme and reality that many players and classes in World of Warcraft Classic will attempt to claim pretty much every item as their best in slot. And then That's My BiS. I thought it sounded like an appropriate name for this website, as I've literally designed it to help raiders tell their loot council, hey, that's my BiS, give it here. And then there's also a link to a very funny YouTube video that elaborates on his point and makes a funny video out of it. So it's called That's My BiS, an Ode to Fury Prod. So you can check that out if you want to on YouTube. So TMB is a form of loot council, and as such you could call it an LC-TMB because it's loot council with a wish list. So in a loot council system, there's an inner circle of raid members, typically referred to as officers, and they will create a list before the raid even starts that determine how the loot will be distributed, like who will receive what if it drops. And so this list may be hidden or made public by the entire raid. However, in LC-TMB, this list is also created before the raid, or this list is created always before the raid even starts, and it is made by all the raid members. So instead of just being made by the inner circle, it's made by all the raid members, and the list is always public. So this table here below shows the difference. So on the first row you have loot council, and on the second row you have loot council That's My BiS. So both uses the in-game loot system master looter, and both uses a predetermined loot priority sheet. However, loot council, there may not be a predetermined loot priority sheet. It could happen that they do it on the fly in the game, but in general there's some sort of predetermined loot priority sheet to just manage the whole process. And then, is this list hidden or public? Well, in the loot council it could be either or, but in a loot council That's My BiS, it's going to be public. And then who populates the predetermined loot priority sheet? In a loot council, it's made by the loot council members themselves, while in loot council That's My BiS, all the raid members, basically everyone in the group, is putting in their own wish list. So it's made by everyone. So what does the tool do, like the website? So the TMB tool aims to give loot councils an easy way to fairly distribute loot by providing them with the necessary information for them to make their decisions. So it's something that helps the loot council members when a raid is using the loot council system. So at a glance, everyone can see like what items everyone is going for, like what are they trying to get, what loot they have received in the past, any notes that may have been put into the system, and then everything is just packaged in a clean and easy to read interface. Now for the raiders, the benefits is that they can clearly and easily communicate to the loot council and fellow raiders what they want to be going for, like what loot are they looking for to get. And so it makes it a lot more difficult to accidentally overlook what items that you're going for in the loot council's loot distribution. And the system can even be used to identify loot that the rest of the raid may have overlooked. And so if you're a raider that's paying attention to the wish list, you may find items that no one has wish listed. And so you can put yourself on that, and that might make it easier for you to get items because there's no competition, or very little competition. So let's go through an example of what this system would look like in practice. So let's say we're in Blackwing Lair, BWL, we're on the boss Chromagus, and the chromatically tempered sword drops. And there are 40 players in the raid. So 4 of these players have put this sword, the chromatically tempered sword, as their priority number 1 in the predetermined loot priority sheet, in their wish list before the raid started. So you can put, have different priorities to distribute, and 4 of the players put priority number 1 on this item. Everyone that puts priority 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on this sword, they cannot participate. Only the people with the highest priority can participate, and if there are more than 1, they all participate together. So there's 4 players, they all have priority number 1, so they will have to do a tiebreak. So typical tiebreak is to use the in-game RNG, random number generator, which is type /roll, and then you roll between 1 and 100, and then the highest roll will win the item. So let's say that's the tiebreak that they use. Player 1 rolls 34, player 2 56, player 3 13, and player 4 23. And because player 2 rolled 56, which is the highest number of the 4, they win the item. Now the master looter will give this item to player number 2. And note, if no one had priority number 1 on the item, the next up would be anyone with priority number 2 on the item. If no one had priority number 2, next up will be anyone with priority number 3 on the item, etc. Until there was no one that, you exhausted the list of everyone that had priorities on the item. And if there's only one person with the highest priority on the item, let's say no one had priority number 1, but only one person had priority number 2, then that person with priority number 2 on the item will get the item unchallenged because there was no one else with the same priority level to challenge. The group may have other ways to determine the winner when more than one player has the same priority level for the item. That's what I'm referring to when I say tiebreak, other than just rolling. But typically, people use the 1 to 100 roll to break the ties. So what are the advantages of this system? So the LC-TMB reduces the workload for the group membership when it comes to loot distribution, since the group members are selecting the items themselves. And because there is a predetermined loot priority sheet, the wish list, and it's created and locked ahead of time, and it's public, there's full transparency for all the people in the raid regarding how any item will be handled during the loot distribution if whatever item drops. So with TMB, everyone knows exactly who is getting what items in which order, outside of the tie breaks, which typically use the random number generator, so it's up to luck who actually gets it. But this can certainly reduce uncertainty, stress, arguments, conflicts, and overall friction among group members, which could be a big benefit to a loot council loot system, which that sort of thing can be quite problematic in that kind of system, because the loot council has just so much authority and power when it comes to loot distribution. And since there's a predetermined loot priority sheet for all the items, there's no need to loot council every single item during the raid. So there's no need to stop. The loot council needs to decide and discuss and figure out, okay, who should get this item, who would benefit the most, who's been here the longest, whatever priorities they want to use. It's none of that. It's it's predetermined. There's already path set up for a tie break, what method to use, and so there's just less downtime during the raid for distributing the loot. And there's not going to be challenges during the raid or arguments that come up from how the item is given out, because it was already set up ahead of time how that would happen. And then mentioned if there are priority ties, so that more than one member having the same priority for an item, they're quickly resolved using a predetermined method, which is typically the 1 to 100 roll. So very little downtime at all. And so a couple of benefits. So compared to like a DKP system, so a DKP system uses drag and kill points, which are accumulated over time. In that sort of system, seniority and attendance are much more important than this loot council, that's my BiS system. In a DKP system, there will be the head start effect where the members that join very early on are going to have a lot of DKP, and so new members are not going to be very enticed to join the group, just because if you are joining, let's say, a month or two after a raid started, you're going to have, like, the current members are going to have so much DKP, you're not going to get any items for a really long time, if at all. And so it can be quite hard for DKP raids to recruit new members. But you're not going to have that problem with the loot council, that's my BiS system, just because there's no accumulation of DKP points that will prevent new recruits from wanting to join. And then on the gold side, in-game currency in World of Warcraft, which is used by the GDKP loot system, that is a system where whoever bids the most gold will win the item. So that favors the wealthiest players. A lot of players consider that as having a negative effect on the game because it encourages people to use real world money to buy in-game currency, just so that they can bid up and win whatever items they want in-game. So you can have, one player in the GDKP system just swoops in, they bought a ton of gold using real money, and they have a ton of gold in-game, and they just buy whatever they want. And just has a lot of players just think that has a negative effect on the game overall. Disadvantages of this system. So there is some setup effort required for the group leadership to create the TMB list on the website. But certainly with that website in existence, it's a lot less work than it would be to do it in like an Excel sheet or some sort of Google Docs or something like that. So most players are able to navigate that pretty easily. It's not a big downside. And once it's set up and people are used to it, it's typically very low maintenance to keep it going. All group members need to be sufficiently proficient and knowledgeable to be able to go into the website and fill out their item priorities. Now, it's not particularly difficult, and most people can do it on their own, watch a video or get some simple instructions, but if necessary, someone can walk a player through it. It typically, once it's established and people are used to it, it will be, again, very low maintenance to make sure members go in and update their priorities. So in this system, loot is not distributed according to attendance, performance, size of upgrade, attitude, etc. So some group members will find this system to be unfair. And that's going to be especially if they are a very high performer and very consistent member of the group. Let's say it's a damage dealer that does a lot of damage, or if it's a healer that does a lot of healing, and they are seeing loot going to some of the lower performance members, or maybe some members that are not showing up very often. And that could be because they are, they have the same priority on a certain item, but the higher performer player has worse luck and is losing out the rolls and is not winning the items that they want. And so that can cause some frustration for those players. And because the way the loot is distributed, it doesn't optimize the overall benefit to the group's performance. Right? In a loot council, if the group wants to, the loot council can give the items that drop to the players that will so that it will most help the group's performance overall. But this is not the case with loot council, that's my BiS, because of the priorities. So the item might go to a person that is not optimal for the group's overall improvement. It would be better if it had gone to someone else. So this is an important downside for most competitive, high-end speedrunning progression groups. So they will typically not use loot council, that's my BiS. If players are unlucky regarding their priority items dropping, it may take a long time until they have a chance of getting loot. So that's kind of what I mentioned earlier. Just so, even if you have an item as your priority number one, first of all, it could take a long time before it drops. And then even when it drops, you might lose the roll or the tiebreak, whatever tiebreak system that's in place. Okay, summary. So TMB is an abbreviation for that's my BiS, BiS being best in slot. And this is a system that was invented by players outside of the game, and it uses the master looter system in-game for loot distribution. So the master looter will just give the item to whoever won it according to the that's my BiS rules, or however that was set up. And the most popular way to do this is to use the TMB tool for loot management, and that's on this website, that'smybis.com. And so this tool aims to give the loot councils an easy way to fairly distribute loot by providing them with the necessary information for them to make their decisions. So it's made to help loot councils. And with TMB, everyone knows exactly who is getting what items in which order. So this can reduce uncertainty, stress, arguments and conflicts, and overall friction among group members. But because loot is not distributed according to attendance, performance, size of upgrade, attitude, etc., there will be some members that find this system unfair, especially people that are very high performing, that is doing a lot for the group, but generally has bad luck with the drops and the rolls. And because the way the loot is distributed, it doesn't optimize the overall group benefit to the group's performance in the same way a regular loot council loot system could. So this is an important downside for most very competitive, high-end speedrunning progression groups. So that concludes what I wanted to talk about in this video on Loot Council That's My BiS. Thanks for watching.